Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour. US President Donald Trump threatened escalating tariffs on key European allies unless the US is allowed to buy Greenland. Duties would start at 10% on February 1 and rise to 25% by June. European leaders rejected the demand, warning it could damage NATO unity, derail trade deals, and deepen transatlantic tensions. Syrian government forces advanced into Kurdish-held areas near the Euphrates, taking Tabqa and key dams despite US calls to stop. Kurdish-led SDF accused the army of violating a withdrawal deal and warned it would fight to hold remaining towns and oil fields. Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei accused President Trump of fueling deadly protests that killed over 3,000 people. Khamenei called Trump a criminal, while Iran blamed the unrest on US and Israeli interference amid mass arrests and internet shutdowns. European Union and Mercosur leaders have signed the landmark free trade agreement in Paraguay after 25 years of negotiations, paving the way for what would become the European Union's largest ever trade deal. The accord covers the European Union with Argentina, Brazil, Paraguay, and Uruguay, but still requires approval from the European Parliament. New York City Mayor Mamdani has appointed Tricia Shimomura as the city's new Parks Department Commissioner, tasking her with managing more than 30,000 acres of land. Mamdani praised Shimomura's decade-long record of public service, while Shimomura called the role an honor and vowed to make a difference. According to IMF statements, the International Monetary Fund has approved a $260 million disbursement for Ethiopia after completing the fourth review of its 48-month extended credit facility, bringing total IMF support under the program to just over $2.18 billion. Syria's Communications Minister Abdul Salman Haikal said that internet users can now access the Google Play Store without a VPN and that most Google services are expected to return to Syria soon. The restoration follows the removal of Syria from US Treasury's off-act sanctions list last year. According to a Department of Justice letter filed with Judge Paul Engelmeyer, the US Justice Department has urged a New York federal judge to reject lawmakers Rob Khanna and Thomas Massey's push for a special master to oversee the release of Jeffrey Epstein-related files. Alright, viewers, let's start with the top news now coming in is from Greenland. Dutch Foreign Minister David van Weel has criticized US President Donald Trump's threat to impose tariffs on European allies unless they agreed to sell Greenland to the US. Van Weel called the threat a blackmail, adding that it's unnecessary and damages the NATO alliance. Trump announced a 10% tariff on goods from Denmark, Norway, Sweden, France, Germany, the Netherlands, Finland, and Great Britain, effective February 1. These countries have pledged to contribute personnel to NATO's Greenland mission. Van Weel pointed out that the mission was about showing Europe's commitment to defending Greenland, and he opposed Trump linking it to trade demands. Trump has long insisted on full ownership of Greenland, citing its strategic importance and mineral resources. However, both Denmark and Greenland have made it clear that the island is not for sale, and people of Greenland do not want to join the US. All right, I have Dr. Satoru Nagao, fellow at the Hudson Institute of Tokyo, joining me in this discussion. Thanks very much, Dr. Nagao, for joining me. Firstly, how do you react to the protests that are now growing in different parts of Europe on Trump's tariff threats if he does not get Greenland from Europe?
This problem has happened because of the two sides the perception. There is a gap. In the American side, under the Trump administration, Greenland is part of the American continent. This means that America's influential area, at least it should be. So that's why the defense and security matter is important, and China and Russia expanding influence, that is the concerning point. But to deal with China and Russia, America must lead this move, is America's idea. In, but in case of the Europe, Europe has already had the Greenland, so that's why the European countries think America's concern is China and Russia, and increasing the share of the security burden will be the solution. That's why the European countries send the troops in the Greenland and try to fill the gap of the defense and security in this area. So, view from the United States, this is not the answer because U.S. thinks this area should be America's influence area. So to deal with China and Russia, America must do themselves without support from Europeans. So that's why currently, even if the European countries send the troops to fill the security gap in the Greenland, and view from the European, this is a contribution of the America's security. But view from the Trump administration, this is offensive. America want to get Greenland, but European try to defend it. Something like that. So perceptual gap has happened. And the American side, the Trump administration side, rise the tariff against countries which send the troops to the Greenland. That has happened. So view from Europe, despite they try to contribute American security, why the U.S. try to impose the tariff to this country, this is completely unexpected. But such kind of the gap of the perception has happened, I think.
All right. As far as the transatlantic alliance is concerned, do you think that with Trump's tariff threats and with the European Union pushing its troops to Greenland amidst this acquisition bid threat, do you think the entire DNA of the alliance is now going to change?
Yes, the mood is bad, but in this case, America do not need the European military power, but European country needs American military power. So in this case, if the negotiation has happened from the two sides, between two sides, in this case, America has the advantage in European does not have is my current situation. So view from the emotional situation, trust has broken by such kind of the offensive negotiation, and that is true. But at the same time, the view from the cards, diplomatic cards they have to deal between two. In this case, still America has some advantage because European need America, but America do not need Europe. That is a military reality in this negotiation.
And how do you see the statement that's come out from Donald Trump, the one that we're flashing on our screens right now? The post, in fact, that he's put out to say that he's long subsidized Denmark. Why do you think the absence of trade barriers is now being called as a subsidy by one nation to another?
The United States, anyway, United States want to get Greenland for security or for rare earths, or these are the reasons people guess, and I also agree. But in this case, negotiation cards should be the different. Originally, President Trump tried to show anything could happen, including a military operation to occupy Greenland. But at the same time, as a reality, America should not use military power against the ally. So that's why this is indeed impossible card American can use. So as a gesture, the America use the military operation, but the reality is a more practical card is needed. And finally, they find is money-related issue. Firstly, the providing money to the people in Greenland, or another card is rising tariff. So this is a negotiation between allies. So military is not the main card to deal. Instead of this, money is the main card to deal. The Trump administration tried to use it. That's why rising tariff has happened, and delivering money is also the U.S. can suggest. And so money, 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 why they are talking? Because this is relatively practical between the allies. That is my current situation, I think.
Okay. Thanks and very much, Dr. Nagao, for joining me and speaking to us here at NewsX World. With that, viewers, we're now going to shift. Now, Qatar is saying that its representative, Ali Al-Thawadi, is part of the US-backed Gaza Executive Board to support international efforts for effective governance and long-term peace in Gaza. Thawadi, a key figure in Qatar's mediation efforts, has engaged with Israel, Hamas and other partners and played a role in Trump's 20-point Gaza plan. Israel publicly criticized the board's composition, particularly the involvement of Thawadi and Turkey's foreign minister. Prime Minister Netanyahu is holding cabinet and security meetings today, reportedly in response to the board's formation, with Iran also on the agenda. I now have Mohammed Osman, who is international relations expert from Cairo, joining me in this discussion.
Thank you for having me, Kriti.
Thanks very much, Osman, for joining me. Firstly, let's talk about the fact that there is no Palestinian in this group. There's no woman in this group. It's a male-dominated, American-dominated group that Trump has put forward.
Yeah, it's quite amusing because right now we have three institutions that have been established for the future governance of Gaza, starting with the Board of Peace, led by President Trump, and this executive board that will aid the Palestinian National Committee, Transitional Committee, in its administration of Gaza. And then you have the Palestinian National Administrative Committee led by Dr. Ali Shah, which include one woman. So one woman in three of the councils, unfortunately. But despite the lack of gender representation, gender fair or gender just representation in these councils, this is not really the primary concern at this point. The primary concern is the viability of these institutions and their ability to actually push forward the peace agenda in Gaza and push forward the agenda of early recovery and reconstruction, because it seems that Israel has given signals already with its public statements that it's not going to play game, that it's not going to be cooperative and flexible to the extent which allows these institutions to actually push the Trump plan forward. And this will require, of course, more pressure from the United States on the Israeli side so that they would cooperate and comply with their obligations under the Trump peace plan and the Sharm el-Sheikh agreement. However, at the same time, we have seen reports from the Israeli media that indicate that Prime Minister Netanyahu's criticism of these committees and these governing structures is not really that genuine as one might think. It has been reported that the Israelis and the Israeli government, and Prime Minister Netanyahu in particular, was informed and briefed with these developments, and that he is taking these public stances at the moment in order to appease the right-wing elements in his government, especially the likes of Ben Gvir and Smotrich in his cabinet at this point, to prevent a collapse of his ruling coalition. However, at the same time, this might indicate that the Israelis might allow, or at least partially be flexible with these governing structures, even though I do have my doubts. On the ground, the Israelis are expanding the yellow line, occupying more land, resuming the killing every day. Almost every day, there are strikes and violations of the ceasefire that lead to fatalities among civilians. Since the ceasefire went into effect about 3 months ago, over 500 Palestinians, most of them civilians, have died in Israeli attacks. So this hardly sounds like a textbook ceasefire to me. The Israelis have a very demented definition of a ceasefire, where one side gets to shoot and advance and change the front lines and the areas of control. I think we will have to wait and see whether the National Committee will be allowed into Gaza to govern. Right now they are in Egypt. They are supposed to move in the near future into Gaza. Hamas has expressed its will to hand over power in the areas of control to the National Committee. Is Hamas also being genuine and completely cooperative? This also stands to or remains to be seen in the very near future, Kriti.
All right, Shah, do you also see this board of peace now turning into a Trump versus Netanyahu battle after Israel's objection to the members of the board, especially when these two have been the strongest allies that the world have known?
Well, let's not kid ourselves. I don't think that because battles have to happen between peers, between equals. Netanyahu and Trump are not equals. The United States is the patron of Israel, and Netanyahu understands that very well. He will never drag himself or drag his country into a squabble or a confrontation with the United States, especially with the existence of a president with the temperament of Donald Trump. I think he understands that very well. However, Netanyahu is very skilled in manipulating President Trump and getting his way around eventually. And let's not forget, Netanyahu is being more flexible in Gaza, or as allowing these structures to developments to take place, and being at least cooperative behind the scenes with the Americans in exchange for possible military action against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and also possibly a new conflict with Iran, as we have discussed this previously, and we see with the current developments in the region. So it's not that simple. Netanyahu will not just risk all of this in order for to embarrass Trump in his bid to at least project the illusion that he is advancing the peace agenda forward in Gaza. And the Israelis can obstruct the implementation of these plans and the Trump plan on the ground in a very subtle manner that will not provoke the Americans. And we have seen how the Americans have dealt with 3 months of Israeli violations. The first phase of the agreement was implemented in a very distorted way. Only the Palestinian side honored their commitments. The Israelis largely ignored and violated most of their commitments under the agreement. And as you can see, Kriti, I believe that the second phase will witness very similar trends to the first phase, a very distorted implementation that will be void of any actual meaning that will serve the beleaguered people of Palestine and Gaza.
All right, Shah, Osman requested to stay on with us as we proceed now. We're going to cover some news from Iran. Viewers, Iranian authorities have verified at least 5,000 deaths in the protests that have erupted across the country, including around 500 security personnel. The official, who requested anonymity due to sensitivity of the issue, revealed that some of the most violent clashes took place in the Kurdish regions of northwest Iran, a hotspot where Kurdish separatists have historically been active. The Iranian government has blamed foreign interference, including Israel and armed groups abroad, for fueling the unrest, accusing them of equipping and supporting the protesters. Human rights groups, including the US-based Harana, estimate the death toll at 3,308, with over 24,000 arrests confirmed. In addition, the Iranian Kurdish rights group Hengo has reported that the heaviest clashes and most violent scenes have occurred in Kurdish-dominated areas. The situation remains tense, particularly in the northwest, with authorities expressing hope that the final toll won't rise significantly. Mohammed, I request you to join me back in the discussion here. Firstly, let's talk about the fact that yesterday Khomeini had issued a statement and said that US-linked, Israel-linked actors are behind thousands of people killed in Iran. After Trump had said that, thanking Iran in fact had said that executions will be stopped. So of course there's a lack of clarity. Some of the people on ground have reported to have said that they've seen 5,000 of people lying dead. So clearly, the fact now that the US rights group's death toll is also significantly lower than the Iranian official death toll. Why do you think this mismatch has now come, particularly after Trump's statement saying that executions were stopped because Trump spoke to Iran?
Independent sources and human rights groups in Iran, or who are focused on Iran as well as the Iranian opposition, wants to basically point out to President Trump and the Americans that the situation, that the American red lines were not honored, basically, that the Iranian authorities have massacred the protests as part of their very harsh crackdown to end these protests and these riots. So they want to point out the fact that even though President Trump conditioned any possible intervention or threat of intervention, its implementation on whether the Iranian government would kill protesters en masse or not, they want to deliver the message that they have been killed en masse on likely an unprecedented level, because in previous riots and in previous uprisings, never have they reached these very high death tolls. 5,000 protesters, according to Reuters and some sources inside Iran. This, of course, are staggering statistics. So, of course, however, this 5,000 figure can be a bit misleading because it includes hundreds of security personnel. It includes also people who were killed by the rioters. These were not entirely peaceful protests. They started out as peaceful protests. However, they turned into riots and armed acts of rebellion afterwards. And I'm not defending how the Iranian regime is conducting itself. However, we have to be objective and look at how we look at this and how the United States and Israel are trying to employ this internal situation in Iran in order to pressure Iran to give more concessions, or even as a pretext for a possible war of regime change that we might witness, by the way, in the next few weeks, if not few days, given the current American military movements in the region, the posturing and the mobilization of massive military assets and the carrier group coming from Southeast Asia to the Middle East. So things are heading towards an escalatory trajectory, it seems, at this point. So
Osman, many experts have spoken to us and told us that a regime change at this point in time is unlikely, even if Khamenei goes out, which, like I said, is unlikely as per many. Who is it that's going to fill the vacuum? Reza Pahlavi has only issued calls for protest but hasn't even turned up on ground so far. So there's also clearly discontentment against him.
Reza Pahlavi is not being taken seriously by the Americans. I would assure you that, and I've spoken to people on several sides, and I know that he's not being taken seriously, at least by the American side at this point, because he does not have the credentials or the gravitas, basically, of a statesman who can fill the vacuum in case the regime falls. On the idea that taking out Khamenei, as you correctly pointed out in my viewpoint, taking out Khamenei like the way they took out Nicolas Maduro by assassinating Khamenei or something of the like, it will not really necessarily lead to regime collapse or a change in the regime's policy. It will just be replaced by another senior cleric or a senior member of the regime supported by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and basically the Iranian regime will even be more hardline and defiant in its stance. And the idea that the regime might fall or is on the verge of falling, I think, was a miscalculation on the part of the Americans and the Israelis. The protests were massive. However, how the Americans intervened and supported, and the Israelis supported these protests openly, and even the Israelis revealed that they are actually giving actual support to some elements on the ground to fuel the protests. This basically discredited the protests in the eyes of the Iranian public, so they lost support. Basically, eventually. So I think it was very counterproductive how the US and the Israelis dealt with these massive demonstrations against the regime. It led to their failure, and it made a regime crackdown on them easier. As Khamenei pointed out in his speech, those are agents of the West, which is not really true. These were massive demonstrations, genuine popular uprising against a despotic regime in Iran that has failed to deliver on many of its objectives, that has repressed the Iranians for decades, that has caused the economic collapse of the country with their irresponsible foreign policy due to the sanctions. But on the other hand, by basically attempting to direct this uprising as a tool of foreign hegemony by the United States, it discredited it inside Iran, because Iran is a proud nation. It's not some rump state. It is a civilizational nation state with its deep roots in history, and it has an established strong state institutions. So they will not really give that away in return for regime change from abroad. So this is the problem, and this is the conundrum, really, Kriti. However, my fear is that the Americans and the Israelis still do believe that military pressure on the Iranians might work. And even the Israelis are trying to pitch the idea that regime change is something that can be affordable, even though it can cause a vacuum that will cause a whole new phase of chaos and pandemonium in the Middle East.
All right, Osman, do stay on with me as we proceed. Request your opinion once more. Viewers, now Syrian troops are engaged in combat with US-backed Kurdish-led forces, have captured the Omar oil field, the largest in the country, along with the Konoko gas field in eastern Deir Zone province, as allied Arab tribal forces advanced in the oil-rich area near the Iraqi border. According to reports, the capture of the oil fields east of the Euphrates River, a key revenue source for the Kurdish-led forces, dealt a significant blow to the group, as it has been deprived as the state of resources used by the military. The Syrian army has pressed ahead into predominantly Arab-populated areas of southeast Syria controlled by the US-backed Syrian Democratic Forces, despite US calls to halt its advance. Osman, I request you once again to join us and begin with your comments first.
Well, the situation in Syria has deteriorated substantially. What began as a military operation in Aleppo to expel the SDF of this area, it seemed at this point that this was an arrangement that the Americans agreed to after some extensive Turkish and Syrian lobbying at Washington, that they would allow the Syrian government to basically expel the SDF, the Syrian Democratic Forces, out of the western part of the Euphrates River. However, today there are very dangerous developments, because the Syrian government forces, or pro-government forces, and tribal militias as well that are supportive of the government, have crossed the Euphrates River, seizing vast swaths of territory, including the major city of Raqqa, which basically, according to many reports, has fallen already, or most of it has fallen to the pro-government forces. So it seems this is either one of two things. It's either that the Syrian government is testing its limits and seeing how far it can go in its pursuit of reestablishing control over as much of Syria as it can, and to weaken the SDF and even topple it, or the US has just thrown their historical ally, the SDF, under Turkish pressure, under the bus, basically in return for certain guarantees. I think we will find out in the next few hours. But it seems now there is some diplomatic movement by the United States. Tom Barak is in Damascus. The U.S. Special Envoy to Syria and Lebanon is reportedly in Damascus at the moment. It has been reported that Mazloum Abdi, the head of the SDF, is in contact with both Tom Barak and Syrian President Ahmed al-Shara at this point, and that there was also some mediation welcomed by the Americans from the side of the Iraqi Kurdish provincial government in Iraqi Kurdistan in order to attempt to de-escalate the situation. It has been reported that Mazloum Abdi was offered the position of being the government of Hasaka, which is the largest Kurdish city in the eastern Euphrates area, in exchange, of course, for allowing the rapid reintegration into Syrian state structure and basically de-establishing the de facto autonomous government of the Kurds in the eastern Euphrates River. However, it's too early to determine whether there is a political deal behind closed doors, or that if seriously the SDF has been sold out by the Americans and now the Syrian government, and supported by Turkey, will just take them out and re-establish control of the government on the eastern banks of the Euphrates. Very, very rapid developments in Syria indeed.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Osman, for joining us and helping us with those details. Moving ahead, viewers, there's some tragic news now coming in from Austria, where 8 people have been killed in a series of avalanches across the Austrian Alps as rescuers urge skiers to heed repeated warnings about dangerous snow conditions. In the Murtal district of Styria, 3 Czech ski tourers were swept away and buried by a massive avalanche. Rescuers located them, but all three were later found dead. Earlier in the day, an avalanche struck off skiers in the Pongau region near Salzburg, killing 4 and injuring another in the Gastein Valley. Officials say the recent heavy snowfall has made slopes highly unstable, and rescue teams are warning outdoor enthusiasts to stick to marked trails and follow safety advisories. District Mountain Rescue Head Gerhard Kremser described the situation as extremely serious and said clear warnings were issued ahead of the incidents. This tragedy follows other recent avalanche deaths in the Alps, including incidents in neighboring Switzerland and France, underscoring the ongoing dangers in winter mountain areas. And that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.